My name is Daniel. I just got back from the police station, closing the chapter on the most horrifying event of my life. But it's only a legal ending. The memories will haunt me for as long as I live. Everything started 4 years ago. After being single for a long time, I downloaded Tinder. Before long, I met a girl named Amber. We hit it off immediately. Amber was smart and shared almost the same taste in everything as me. After only 2 weeks of dating, Amber suddenly suggested that we move in together to take our relationship to the next level. I was shocked by how pushy she was. Even though I liked her, I felt things were moving way too fast. I had a vague, uneasy gut feeling, so I decided to turn her down and end the relationship right then and there. Amber didn't accept it. She lost her mind. For the next month, I was bombarded with desperate texts, missed calls in the middle of the night, and emails of her sobbing and begging me to come back. Her stalking only made me more certain that leaving her was the right choice. Then, suddenly, Amber went completely silent. I figured she had finally found a new target. About a month later, I went to my high school reunion and ran into my ex-girlfriend, Lily. We had broken up on good terms years ago, so reconnecting felt very natural. The mix of familiarity and new sparks made me fall in love with Lily all over again. But the happiness didn't last long. Shortly after I got back together with Lily, the real nightmare began. I started getting texts from an unknown number. The messages were incredibly sick. "You're making a mistake," and "You're going to pay for this." I tried calling back, but the line was always disconnected. Lily started getting the same threatening messages too. She was terrified, crying all the time, and wouldn't leave my side. I began to suspect that Amber was behind it. The texting style was almost identical to the desperate emails she had sent me before. Things escalated until one night. Lily called me in a total state of panic. Her house was engulfed in flames. Luckily, Lily made it out just in time. She told me she thought she heard someone inside earlier, but she was sleepy and ignored it. It was very likely that an intruder had broken in and set the fire. The police investigated, but they couldn't find any evidence or footprints because the security cameras in the area were broken. Right after the fire, I got an anonymous text. "I warned you!" At that point, I completely broke down. I felt like a monster for dragging Lily into the crosshairs of a lunatic like Amber. To keep Lily safe, I made the painful decision to break up with her. When I told her we had to end it, Lily was silent and stared at me for a long time. Then, she simply nodded and agreed. No arguing, no begging. After I broke up with Lily, the harassment faded away and eventually stopped altogether. I heard Lily moved on with someone new and settled down. I believed Amber had finally gotten what she wanted and was leaving me alone. I had almost forgotten the whole thing until one morning when the police knocked on my door. They wanted me to help with an investigation into Amber's death. I was stunned to hear she had been dead for a long time. The next piece of information from the police was even more shocking. The killer was Lily. It turned out that after our first breakup years ago, Lily never actually let me go. She had been secretly stalking me for a long time. Seeing me date Amber was the spark that triggered Lily's hidden dark personality. That crazy woman had planned a way to get close to Amber and murdered her right after our very last date. Then, she took Amber's phone and used it to pretend Amber was still alive, sending those terrifying texts to me, and even to herself. The house fire started to make sense too. The police couldn't prove it then, but looking back, I realized it was all a calculated plan by Lily to point all my suspicion toward Amber. The plan was so perfect that if Amber's mother hadn't been so persistent about reporting her daughter missing, and noticing strange patterns in her daughter's texting style over the years, the truth might have stayed buried forever. Lily was arrested immediately. When I saw the photo of her in handcuffs in the newspaper, I shivered. I realized the woman I wanted to protect, the woman I thought was a victim, was actually a cold-blooded killer who lived with that secret for years just to own me. This story is inspired by a true case. The case of Carrie Farver began in 2012 when she vanished after dating a man named Dave Krupa for 2 weeks. Dave and his ex-girlfriend Shanna received thousands of threats from Carrie's accounts for years. Police originally thought Carrie just ran away, but later discovered Shanna killed Carrie out of jealousy and spent years impersonating the victim to manipulate Dave. Shanna was sentenced to life in prison in 2017, though Carrie's body was never found. I have never told this story to anyone. It is a scar that runs too deep, a secret I have spent my entire adult life trying to bury. I was 19 years old back then. At that age, I was filled with an extreme sense of rebellion. I hated the constraints of my family and wanted to break every rule. That was when I met Peter. Peter wasn't like anyone I had ever known. He lived recklessly, freely, and intensely. With him, I felt like I could truly be myself without being judged or forced to change. So I ran away from home to be with him. We survived by shoplifting from convenience stores and small grocery marts. I learned street skills from Peter. He was also the one who introduced me to drugs. We leaned on each other, just drifting through life like ghosts. Disaster struck when Peter was caught during a theft. He was sentenced to 3 months in a local jail, while I was lucky enough to only be put on probation. During those 3 months, I lived alone, struggling through the agonizing pain of withdrawal and missing him like crazy. I had no idea that while he was locked up, Peter was forced to get completely clean. It was a requirement of the jail, and he was actually sober by the time his release date approached. The day Peter was released, I was so happy I felt like I was losing my mind. I had a gift ready to welcome him back, a $10 bag of heroin. The moment we met outside the jail gates, we threw our arms around each other in pure joy. We hurried into a quiet, secluded alleyway, hidden from everyone's sight. I pulled out the gift. Peter looked at me, and for a split second, I saw a flash of hesitation in his eyes. But in the end, his old addiction and his desire to please me won. We used the drugs together. I had missed that floating sensation and the way the world spins for 3 long months. Eventually, we drifted off into a deep sleep in each other's arms. I don't remember much of what happened next. My memory is a blurred mess of being conscious and being blacked out. The only thing I felt clearly was Peter beside me. I felt completely safe and at peace. At one point, I felt Peter fidgeting as if he wanted to leave or get up. But because I wanted to keep him in my arms, I grabbed his sleeve and pulled him closer, hugging him as tight as I could. When I finally woke up, the sun was starting to come up. A few seconds after I cleared my head, I realized something was wrong. Peter's body in my arms was ice cold, and his skin was a bruised, purplish color. I tried to convince myself he was just in a very deep sleep, but when I touched his chest, there was no heartbeat. I froze for a few seconds before total panic set in, and then I scrambled up, screaming his name over and over. No matter how hard I shook him or how loud I yelled, Peter didn't wake up. Then, terror hit me as I realized I was sitting next to a corpse. In a moment of total panic, I did the most cowardly thing of my life. I ran. I bolted out of that alley, leaving his body lying there among the trash. Later that afternoon, I overheard some homeless people talking about a man's body found in the alley. The police concluded it was a typical overdose death of a wandering addict. There was no big investigation, and no one came looking for me. Given Peter's situation, I knew they just saw it as another typical death of a young addict and didn't look into it further. Even though I wasn't prosecuted, the haunting in my mind is 1,000 times worse than jail. I realized that when Peter was fidgeting that night, he wasn't trying to leave me. He was reaching out for help. He was desperately searching for a way to survive while I, blinded by my own selfishness and the drugs, held him tight, accidentally choking off his last chance at life. I had slept soundly on top of the cooling body of the person I loved most. My name is Rachel. 15 years ago, after going through 2 unhappy marriages and having no children of my own, I adopted a baby boy named Joe. I was always so proud of him. I felt lucky to raise such a good kid. He was thoughtful, did well in school, and was remarkably handsome. Since I didn't have a partner, I had to work extra hard to provide for the 2 of us. I worked 2 jobs at the same time. I always tried to organize my life perfectly so I could still spend plenty of quality time with Joe. I used to think I understood him completely, but I was wrong. Because of his personality and his looks, Joe had a lot of girls interested in him by his sophomore year of high school. He was very open about his dating life and shared stories with me often. I was very easygoing about it and happy that he felt comfortable telling me everything. Eventually, Joe started asking to bring girls over to the house. Sometimes, these girls would ask to sleep over, claiming they were studying late or that their parents couldn't pick them up. I agreed to let them stay. Because of my second job, I usually got home late, so I didn't interfere much. I just reminded the kids to behave responsibly. However, after about a semester, I started to feel uneasy. The number of girls Joe brought home kept increasing. I realized I almost never saw the same girl a second time. At the time, I just assumed he was a typical teenager who caught feelings fast and lost interest even faster. One morning on my way to work, I happened to see a missing person flyer taped to a utility pole near a store. The face of the girl on the flyer made me stop in my tracks. She looked incredibly familiar. If I wasn't mistaken, she was one of Joe's former girlfriends. I planned to ask him about it when I got home, but I ended up forgetting. Over the next few days, more flyers appeared. All the girls were around Joe's age, and they were wearing the familiar uniforms of the high school he attended. I asked Joe about it. I was curious because he usually talked a lot about school, but he hadn't mentioned this at all. Joe just gave a cold smile and said he didn't like sharing sad news. He asked me to stop bringing it up. I thought a lot about his attitude and that specific comment. My mother's intuition told me something was very wrong, and I decided to keep a closer eye on my son. I secretly changed my work schedule. I started coming home 2 hours early from each job, making the excuse that I was tired and needed more rest. In reality, I was quietly observing Joe, and a mother's gut feeling is never wrong. Joe started going out late at night, claiming he was taking a walk or meeting a friend. He kept his phone with him at all times and changed his password constantly. Some nights, he would come home very late and immediately start a load of laundry in the middle of the night. One day when Joe wasn't home, I snuck into his room to check around. The room was clean and organized, just like always. But while looking through his notebooks and papers, I found a stack of papers hidden deep under a pile of documents. When I pulled them out, I was horrified. They were all the missing person flyers for the high school girls who had disappeared over the past few months. On each flyer, there were handwritten notes. They were judgmental comments like, "Too noisy," "Can't keep a secret," or "Too demanding." The handwriting undeniably belonged to my son. What I read next in Joe's diary was truly nightmare-inducing. Entry 1. She was noisier than I thought. The screaming was so annoying. Entry 2. Getting better. Being more forceful is definitely the best method. Entry 3. Perfect. Keep doing it this way. All of these notes, combined with the strange behavior I had seen over the past few days, led me to one single terrifying conclusion. Joe was the killer. I stood there frozen for a long time. I asked myself if this was really the sweet boy I had raised for 15 years. It has been almost a week since I read those words. I am constantly in a state of panic and fear. I have thought about calling the police, but if my suspicions are true, I don't know how I could face the reality of it. Then I try to tell myself it's all a big misunderstanding and that I'm just overthinking things. I can't act natural around Joe anymore. The more I look at his familiar face, the more like a stranger he becomes. During dinner tonight, Joe suddenly looked directly at me. His gaze made me shiver. He stared deep into my eyes as if he were searching for something. Then Joe gave a slight smile and asked, "You've been acting different lately, Mom." It's almost like you found out a secret, isn't it?
My name is Lacey. I am the only daughter of the Whitmore family, the wealthiest lineage in this region for 4 generations. We live in a massive estate with dozens of full-time staff members. My father was Edward Whitmore. He was a man who controlled everything, every small detail of the house, every business move, and especially me. I never felt like I was allowed to be my own person. Growing up under his thumb created a strange mix of frustration and arrogance inside of me. Then, one night, my father suddenly passed away. It was 3 a.m, right in the primary bedroom he shared with my mother. The doctor concluded it was a sudden heart attack. My father was over 60 and under immense pressure running the company, so he had been warned about his heart health many times. When they carried his body out, I froze at the sight of his face. His mouth was hanging wide open, and his eyes were bugged out in total panic. He didn't look like someone who had died in pain, he looked like someone who had died of pure terror. My mother couldn't accept the doctor's conclusion. She spiraled into a breakdown after the funeral. It wasn't just grief, though. She became mentally unstable. She insisted that something, or someone, had killed my father. She claimed that something stood at the foot of her bed every single night. Even though she couldn't see a face, she said she could feel a cold, hateful gaze staring back at her. During the day, she was distracted and slow to react, jumping at the slightest noise. She checked the bedroom door locks constantly and demanded the servants bolt every single window before sunset. Then the screaming started. Around 2 a.m., she would scream that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting to take her life. The staff and I were exhausted. I suggested she see a psychiatrist many times, but she always shot me down. She insisted she was perfectly sane and that she was the only one alert enough to notice the threat. She refused to listen to any other explanation. A month after my father died, my mother secretly contacted a medium from the next town over. At the same time, she quietly positioned 4 of her most trusted staff members to hide in the hallway. I only found out about this after the trap was already set, so I just shrugged it off. I went to my room and went to sleep like usual, leaving her to her paranoia. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I was jolted awake by a chaotic noise coming from the end of the hall. I heard my mother's piercing scream, heavy thudding footsteps, and the sound of a door being kicked open. I bolted out of bed and ran toward the noise. When I got there, the lights in my parents' suite were blindingly bright. The door was wide open, and the 4 staff members were pinning a man down in the center of the room. He was fighting like a wild animal, trying to break free and reach the open window. Within seconds, the men slammed him into the floor and forced his arms behind his back. I stepped closer and gasped when I saw his face. It was Daniel, the gardener. Daniel was about 30 years old. I didn't even know how long he had worked for us. I had only interacted with him once, but it was an encounter that made his face impossible to forget. I had been driving home in a foul mood after a tense meeting with my father's partners. Daniel was standing near the side gate, blocking the entrance. He told me he was planting new flowers and asked me to use the main gate instead. I lost my temper instantly. I couldn't believe a servant was telling me what to do. I drove straight forward, crushing every single flower bed he had worked on, and barked at him to replant them all. Daniel didn't say a word. He just watched my car pull away with a look that I was too arrogant to care about at the time. It wasn't until everything came to light that night that I finally understood the meaning of that look. It turned out Daniel was my father's illegitimate son. My father had abandoned Daniel's mother before he was even born. Daniel grew up in poverty, his hatred growing alongside him. When his mother died, he began his plan for revenge. He got a job as our gardener to learn our schedules and movements. For months, he had been slipping into my father's room at night. He didn't use weapons or threats. He simply stood there, destroying their mental health through pure psychological torment. His plan was halfway successful. My father's heart gave out from the stress, but my mother survived. It was her stubborn intuition and her refusal to be ignored that finally exposed him. The police hauled Daniel away in handcuffs that night. A heavy, somber mood settled over the villa. My mother sat in silence. She didn't cry, and she didn't say a word. Her eyes were no longer panicked, but they weren't relieved either. As for me, I realized the only thing I could say was, "I'm sorry." I hadn't believed her. I chose to stay out of it, viewing her fear as nothing more than weakness or grief. I had even felt by her screams. My father had planted the seeds of this hatred long ago. Daniel spent his whole life nurturing it, and I, in my blind arrogance, was the one who finally made it bloom. My name is Mark, and my wife Evelyn and I just moved into a new house in Milwaukee. Everything was going as smoothly as we could have hoped for. After everything we had been through lately, we were both praying this place would be the fresh start we needed. However, Evelyn didn't feel completely at home. She started suffering from insomnia. Soon after, she began waking up in the middle of the night with a start, bolting upright and staring intensely into the corner of the room. Evelyn insisted there was something in the house watching us. I didn't believe her. I figured it was just a psychological reaction to moving into an unfamiliar environment. Then, Evelyn started talking about the basement. She claimed that every night she heard a very faint sound coming from down there, like something lightly scratching at the floorboards. I went down to check several times. I looked into every dark corner, but I never found anything out of the ordinary. There were no signs of mice or any disturbed dust. I started to get annoyed having to do it over and over, while Evelyn became more certain that something was living beneath us. One night, I was fast asleep when I woke up to the sensation of the bed shaking violently. It wasn't a tremor, it was a series of sharp, rhythmic jerks. I turned over and saw Evelyn struggling under the blankets, gasping for air. Her hands were flailing as if she were trying to push an invisible weight off her chest. I jumped up, grabbed her by the shoulders, and called her name repeatedly. It took several seconds before her eyes snapped open, looking at me with pure terror. Evelyn told me she had just seen a vision of a woman being buried alive. I tried to comfort her, telling her it was just a vivid nightmare brought on by stress. But Evelyn wouldn't drop it. She shifted from fear to a strange obsession, constantly muttering that it is waiting for the ritual to be completed. Her condition worsened by the day. During the afternoon, she was spaced out, sometimes standing perfectly still as if she were listening to a frequency I couldn't hear. At night, she didn't sleep at all. I started thinking about taking her to see a doctor, but she firmly refused. Evelyn told me she wanted to invite a medium to the house. Feeling helpless, I let her decide, thinking that if it made her feel better, it was worth a try. The session took place in the evening. We dimmed the lights, and the air in the room quickly grew heavy and thick. The medium sat across from Evelyn, and began the ritual by whispering strange, unintelligible words. After only a few seconds, Evelyn suddenly bolted upright. She sprinted out of the room, heading straight for the basement stairs. I chased after her immediately. By the time I got downstairs, Evelyn was standing in the center of the basement floor, her eyes completely blank. I called her name, but she didn't react. When she finally spoke, I gasped. The voice coming out of her mouth wasn't hers at all. "Dig it up," she commanded, pointing directly at the concrete floor. I don't know why, but her absolute certainty made it impossible for me to say no. I grabbed some tools and started breaking through the floor exactly where she pointed. After a while, my shovel hit something solid. I cleared away the dirt around it, and the shape slowly emerged. A long wooden box, looking very much like a homemade coffin, buried deep under the foundation. When I pried the lid open, I was horrified to find a human skeleton inside, lying perfectly straight and composed. The medium stood behind me and gasped in shock. "This spirit doesn't hold a grudge," she whispered. "It's not here for revenge. It's just trapped." At that moment, Evelyn, or whatever was speaking through her, began uttering fragmented, disjointed words. The medium communicated with the entity for a moment before giving us a clear explanation. The spirit was a woman. She hadn't died by suicide or murder. She had voluntarily climbed into that box. As a member of an extremist cult, she believed that by burying herself alive, her soul would leave her body and be reborn on a different plane of existence. But the ritual had failed. Her body died, but her soul was never able to fully depart. The spirit didn't want to hurt Evelyn. It reached out to her because Evelyn was a believer in the afterlife. That belief made her the perfect vessel for the spirit to communicate its plight. The air in the basement suddenly turned ice cold. The medium worked quickly to close the ritual, and Evelyn collapsed into my arms. We handed the remains over to the police, and even performed a small blessing ceremony to help the soul find peace. Evelyn slowly returned to her normal self. But even now, she says the feeling of being called hasn't entirely faded. As for me, I realized that some things I used to think didn't exist are simply things I hadn't been forced to face yet. After many years working in the funeral business, I've handled hundreds of funerals. People on the outside think my job is about death, but it isn't. It's about the living. I listen, guide, and do everything I can to help families say their final goodbye to someone they love. I've been doing this for 15 years. Everything tends to follow the same calm, steady rhythm. But the Harper family was an exception. Michael Harper, 22 years old, drowned while fishing at his family's cabin by the lake. According to the report, Harper was alone when the accident happened. His mother was the one who discovered the situation. Cause of death was ruled as a capsized boat. The body was recovered 2 days later. We got the call on Thursday evening. When I saw the condition of the remains, I had to strongly recommend a closed casket. Water does terrible things to a body, especially after drifting in it for 2 nights. Mrs. Harper came into the office to complete the paperwork. She wore a plain gray coat, hands clasped together, her expression unreadable. She sat down, staring straight ahead, and before I could even offer my condolences, she spoke. "Closed casket. Don't open it. And don't ask." I assured her we would respect the family's wishes completely. But then she said something that made me freeze. "He's not really in there, you know." I waited for her to elaborate. She didn't cry, didn't tremble, didn't show the kind of grief I was used to seeing. She told me that ever since the night her son drowned, he had been coming home every night at exactly 3 a.m. She insisted it wasn't a dream or a hallucination, but the truth. "He comes in through the back door, soaking wet, dripping water just like when they pulled him out of the lake." At first, I thought she was speaking metaphorically. Grief often makes people say strange things. I started noticing puddles, hearing footsteps, the stairs creaking. I used to get up to check, thinking I was losing my mind. But then I saw him standing in the hallway, half of him swallowed by the shadows. His clothes stuck to his body, his head tilted, just staring at me without saying a word. She told the story without a trace of emotion, and without trying to convince me it was real. When she handed me the photo for the obituary, I noticed her hands didn't even shake. In the picture, Michael was smiling brightly, holding a fishing rod, barefoot on a boat. We proceeded with the arrangements. Mrs. Harper didn't want flowers, didn't want a long ceremony, just enough for the family to gather. The casket was closed, but not because the body was in terrible condition, as I had suggested. The truth was exactly what she claimed. It was completely empty. Only a handful of people attended the service. Mrs. Harper sat in the back row, never once looking up, never looking toward the casket. Her eyes stayed fixed on the entrance door, as if she were waiting for someone. When the service ended and people quietly left, she walked up to me and said, "I have to do this, so others will think he's gone." Then she looked up at me, her face still blank. But I still see him. I still hear the water dripping onto the floor. We buried the casket 2 days after the funeral. Mrs. Harper didn't stay. She sat in her car with the engine running and drove away before the last shovel of dirt was placed. I thought I'd never see her again. But a few months later, a colleague from another town told me about a woman who came in to arrange her own funeral before she passed. That woman requested that her casket be screwed shut, tightly. Not only that, she insisted it be reinforced with locks. When they asked her why, she answered in the same cold, calm tone. "Because when I die, I don't want to come back soaking wet."